Hey everyone, if you're really curious what it'd be like to live on an Earth that's actually flat, or maybe you're just interested in some kind of fantasy satire, then this series just might be for you. Today we're going to be reviewing Discworld by Terry Pratchett. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're looking at a series as a whole. I'm actually about halfway through this series, and I decided that I do want to go back and do a review for all of the books that were at the beginning of this series, but before I could even do that, I had to give a quick and dirty introduction to Discworld. Now, I don't even know what to say about Discworld. I've tried this video like 10 times because I don't know what you, as an individual, need to know about a series. I don't know why exactly you would click on this video. Discworld is a fascinating world that is totally meant to make fun of all of the fantasy series, but at the heart of it, it still is very much a fantasy world that is built around some bizarre premises that Terry Pratchett has given it. For example, the very title, a Discworld. It's a flat world that is sitting on the back of 4 elephants that are riding on a turtle. Why? I don't know. They never really explain that, although it does become part of the storyline as you have people trying to determine the gender of the turtle. Atuan is the name of the turtle. Why they're doing that, I don't know. They don't really make that clear either. But that's kind of the whole point of the book series, is to just have things that it puts out there and then it never really explains. That doesn't mean that it is not a coherent world. It very much is. Matter of fact, so one of the things I really like about this series is even though there's a lot of different storylines and there's a lot of different approaches to engaging with this series, the bottom line is that it is still a fantasy world that it works off of its own laws, its own logic, and that's something that you can engage with, but it does it through a series of criticisms and commentary and satire, not just on fantasy series as a whole, but really on pop culture as a whole. And that's something that is shown throughout the whole series. What do you need to know about this world? I really don't know what to tell you. Just like most fantasy series, especially those written by old white guys, no offense to Terry Pratchett and rest in peace, but it has some kind of high medieval Europe as its paradigm. And so there's always talks of kings and queens and patrons, and there's a whole organization that gives you the sense that it's very much based on a medieval Europe with knights and soldiers, what have you. Of course, that's the most popular type of series, and so I think it makes it all the more reason why that would be a part of this satire and this criticism. However, I would say that that is not the sole extent of the fantasy and its criticism, because it very much engages with a lot of more contemporary pop culture. There's at least one book that is all about the development of Hollywood, or as they call it, Holywood, and this creation of an industrial revolution. So there is much more going on. It's peppered throughout the whole series. We'll have references to stuff like Shakespeare, other well-known myths, the Odyssey, fairy tales, or the Phantom of the Opera. There's all those are the basis of some of the books. If you think that you're interested in a series that is satirical and very much still has its basis in some kind of medieval Europe, the main city of which is Ankh-Morpork, which is supposed to be based off of medieval London. Matter of fact, probably the most common way of knowing that is how often they criticize the disgusting river. And medieval London, the Thames, was known for being absolutely disgusting. Matter of fact, I don't know if that's really changed all that much, but the point being that that is supposed to be the idea behind central location. But of course, it's a whole world. And so the characters, you find them in many different parts. And there's some books that never even mention Ankh-Morpork, so that's by no means the only location. You'll find criticisms of lots of things. You'll find parodies of lots of things. And I think that you just have to pick which ones are going to interest you the most. Let me talk about some of the main characters. There's too many to name them all, so let me just name who I think are maybe not the most important, but just the ones encounter the earliest, especially since, like I said, I'm only halfway through the book, and I know that there's a few more protagonists that I have yet to engage with. But the most famous one, or at least the first one, and so I think he becomes kind of the standard bearer of the whole Discworld series, is Rincewind. Rincewind is a terrible wizard. He is at Unseen University, which, by the way, is very much a commentary on the Ivory Tower and academia as a whole. And Rincewind is a terrible wizard, but he has a few select skills, and so we see those skills really playing out over the series of books in which he is in, especially his ability for self-preservation. In most series, when you would have, especially fantasy and epic, you would have the protagonist going towards the danger, trying to solve whatever the problem is. Rincewind and his sense of self-preservation leads him to be running away from it, and yet somehow constantly being dragged back in. So that's the first protagonist that you're going to interact with. Another series of protagonists are the witches. They actually work together in books. And so these are meant to be an interesting comparison and in many ways a foil to the wizards, because instead of being in this hoity-toity ivory tower. These are going to be much more humble individuals that come from usually the outskirts of town. They have a lot of different ways that they engage with magic. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite elements of the magic in this series comes from the witches, and that is, of course, the idea of headology, which I will discuss more in one of my other reviews. Death is an interesting character. He's actually in almost all of the books, at least he shows up in all of the books, and then there's a few in which he is the main character. And he's an underappreciated civil servant. I mean, that's how he is written, but he is also trying to figure out where he fits into everything. And so you constantly see him making choices that, they have interesting consequences. And so that's what leads to him having his own books. And then probably the most famous, or at least up there on top of those protagonists, would be the City Watch. Similar to the witches, it's not just one protagonist, it's a bunch of different protagonists that are working together in each of the books, and they have their own things going on, but there's frequently some kind of mystery or something that they're trying to solve at the heart of their books. None of these series is without humor. Now, the way they do that humor varies from book to book. It's sometimes based off of the puns that they use, the fact that, like I said, very frequently they're referencing something in pop culture, which makes it very easy to be presented as a parody. But sometimes the humor can be a little more nuanced than that, especially if it's a criticism of something like class structure. That tends to be something that comes up a lot, especially if you look at the City Watch. And so there's a lot of different things that you can glean from it, but I would say that it's not a series for anyone that is not going to be interested in the humorous parts of it. That isn't to say that the other elements of the storyline, the adventure, I actually find those to very much still be engaging and interesting. You're very curious as to what's going to happen. All of this is with the backdrop of it being presented in a humorous manner. And the humor, it's all over the place. It's in the footnotes. It's, like I said, it's going to be puns or figuring out whatever popular work it is parodying. All of those are ways that you can appreciate this series. I can't go into each of the protagonists individually. They all deserve their own things. Plus, there's other characters that they don't have their own series, but they pop up in all these different series, and they're very interesting and usually, very entertaining characters. The one thing that I do want to address with this video is the big debate of how exactly do you read Discworld. Now, I'm only halfway through, so maybe my opinion isn't fully credible, but it's the opinion I've developed, and it's what I'm going with. Now, there's two main theories when it comes to reading Discworld. And that is, one, to pick any one of these protagonists and to read their books in whatever order they come out. And you don't have to read it exactly in the numerical order of the whole series. You can skip over the individuals that you're not interested in. I think if you're not going to read all 41 books, I think that is a perfectly fine approach. Or if you're not sure you want to read all 41 books, then maybe that's a way to start. And maybe at some point you'll decide, yeah, actually I do want to read the whole series, and you can go fill in the books that you didn't do by following individual protagonists. Or there's the way I've done it, and that is to just go in publication order. And I have two big reasons for doing that. First of all, I do plan on reading the whole series. And so when I read one of the protagonist books, the next book in the series is almost always a different protagonist, and I'm okay with that. I like having some variability between which storyline I'm following. If I were to read just 5 books with Death as the protagonist in a row, I don't really think that's my thing, but I don't know, maybe I'd enjoy it. I do like his books. When it comes to fantasy series in general, I am a fan of reading in publication order, simply because I like to see the material unfold in the same way that it unfolded for the author. Even if elements of publication, of course, mean that you have some kind of prologue or some kind of retconning going on in a series, that's fine. I like to see that developing, but that's a personal preference, and so maybe that's not for you. But that's the way I try to read almost every series, is in publication order. So who's this series for? Okay, I'll admit there's a few things that might make this a challenge for individuals. First of all, the sheer size of it. If you think that you are not interested in engaging with a series that has 41 books, whether you want to read all of them or not, the sheer breadth of it means that this is a fandom you don't think you could get into. It may not be for you, but hey, like I said, you can always just get started, and if you're intrigued enough to continue on with that protagonist and see how their storyline ends up, then maybe that's an approach that'll work for you. Also, if satire is not your approach to fantasy, if you really think that there's no room for just this commentary on society, then again, maybe it's not for you. Even if you think those things are going to be for you, there's a couple more things that just might dissuade you from reading the series. First is that it does have a very active fandom. And I have by no means had a negative experience with the Discworld fandom, but it can generally be difficult to get into a series when you do have a very active fandom that can have strong opinions on stuff. And this very much does have people with a lot of strong opinions. The other thing I would say is that it has a fair amount of British humor. And so if that's not your thing, then this series probably isn't going to be for you. It's hard to articulate exactly what makes something British humor. Saying simply it has dry elements is probably not the only way that I could characterize it. But I would certainly say that if you don't find British humor generally to your liking, then you probably will struggle with enjoying this series. On top of that, adding yet another element to the British humor is I think that it did have a particular resonance with people of the 80s and early 90s. And I think even though, again, this is set in a medieval fictionalized Discworld, I do think that it tends to resonate with people that grew up in an 80s Britain more than anyone. That is not to say that if you're Gen Z, have no association with Great Britain, that you can't appreciate the series. I very much still appreciate it, even though I'm, I'm a little later, and I definitely don't have a whole lot of connection to 1980s Great Britain. I do think that there's still much to appreciate in this series. So, if you think that sounds interesting to you, or you're already a fan of Discworld and you just wanted to see what this guy had to say about it, please let me know in the comments what your thoughts on Discworld, whether you have a strong opinion on the order in which you should read it, whether you think that I should have focused on different sets of individuals, or if you just think that there's something that you need to know a little more about before you read it, such as the way magic plays out in it, or maybe there's something about the way it satires or the way that it employs humor. Any of those are things that maybe you felt like I should have given it more room of discussion. Please, please let me know in the comments. I absolutely want to know what more people have to think about this series. And of course, like, subscribe, hit that notification button. Thank you for watching Spencer Reads Everything. And until next time, keep those pages turning.